So before we hop back into solo improv, I'm gonna go right to our history segment if
Yeah,
that's cool with you guys.
let's hist it up.
Um, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about UCB, which is stands for the Upright Citizens Brigade. And I got my information from Improv Nation.
Improv
So
Nation.
because I didn't know that much about UCB, to be honest. So this is a part of my improv education. But
Ooh.
so I'm excited to hear maybe what you have, but just a couple of things I did find. It started with a group from IO. Adam McKay, Ian Roberts, Rick Roman, Matt Walsh, Matt Besser, and Horatio Sands, and Amy Poehler. So they kind of, my understanding is, they came out of this IO group. They studied with Del Close, also the father, one of the quote unquote fathers of improv,
Godfather.
started this sort of style, I guess I would call it, where it was like anything. It was like anything goes. Anybody can do improv. I mean, this is what we've been talking about too. Like anyone can do improv. You can do whatever you want. Really, like it seems from what I read, like no rules. So a couple of examples. They did this machine gun blackout format where basically they taken a suggestion from the audience, and they rush the scene to conflict and see how long it takes for it to just become a screaming match. I don't know.
They kind of rose to uh, promontory status in Chicago, and like they were kind of looking for the next thing. Like, well, like we're kind of like a hit indie team in Chicago. Like, where do we go from here? So they heard, granted, this was in the late 90s. So mid to late 90s. So they started coming to New York and doing shows and like, hey, we can do shows in New York, because at the time, improv in New York was not a thing. New York was stealing improvisers for Saturday Night Live, but there wasn't really a lot of improv shows happening. Excuse me. Second City had been coming to New York to do shows a lot. And I think that's probably what gave them the idea. And so they loved performing in New York so much that in the, I want to say it was 98, Rudy Giuliani had like really cracked down on like the crime and the seedy nature that was New York. And so there were a lot of strip joints that were just uninhabited. So the UCB4 came in and they're like, when I say the UCB4, I mean Amy Poehler, Matt Walsh, Matt Besser, and Ian Roberts. And they came in and they're like, hey, let's take this old strip club on the corner of 26th and 8th, right underneath Gristides grocery store, and let's turn it into a comedy club. And they got it super cheap because it like nobody really wanted to like touch this kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And even still today, even though that same theater is not owned by UCB anymore, now it's Asylum New York, um it still has that same austere that it had when it was still a strip club. You know, the stage and the backstage and the seating, it's all the same. Even the sound booth, it's all in the same spots as what it used to be when it was a strip joint. So they came in, they started this whole theater thing, and they just started doing their own shows weekly, and it became such a hit. They started the Del Close Marathon, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 1999, I believe, is when DCM started. And it just got enormously huge. So then they started a second theater in the East Village, affectionately referred to as the Beast, or UCB East, the Beast.
Uh-huh.
Um, so the Beast Theater in the East Village, it was an old movie theater that was like, it was long and thin and narrow. So if you sat all the way in the back of the theater, you had a really hard time hearing and seeing what was on stage, because it was just this long, narrow theater. But it was an
Yeah, I
interesting
mean,
space.
I also my understanding is that I guess it's a format, but it was started by the UCB for Besser, Walsh, Robertson, Polar group. And it was called ASCAT 3000.
ASCAT 3000.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know much about that. It says it was kind of born out of an Armando, which is an Armando is a monologist format where somebody does a monologue throughout the show, and
Yeah.
then from the monologue you do scenes. But I don't know if do you know anything about that ASCAT
I do. I've
format?
seen the show many, 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 many times. So this is where the aforementioned Adam McKay comes into the story, right? So even before we talk about UCB, let's go back a little bit further and talk about the origins of the Armando. Do you know why it's called the Armando?
I feel like somebody told me, but I completely forget.
My former level 3 improv teacher at the Magnet Theater and founder of the Magnet Theater, Armando Diaz, is
Ah,
the person for, and also my wife, who is currently taking classes from Armando right now. It's the person that this format is named after. But back in the days before he started the Magnet, even before he came to New York, he was, doing shows in Chicago, and they were doing that format, which now we call the Armando, but before it had a name, it was just the monologue show, right? That's how the Armando came about. And then
okay.
when Adam McKay kind of transitioned into the Upright Citizens Brigade, they started doing shows in New York. The concept of, I don't know where the name ASCAT 3000 came from. I'm guessing they got drunk and high one night and they're like, hey, this would be a funny title for a show. I have no idea where that came from, but they started doing the Armando Diaz experience. But because Armando had his theater and it was kind of a hit show in Chicago, they kind of wanted to let it be their own thing, so they changed the name to ASCAT 3000.
Yeah, well, and I understand, and that they started at some point. They were able to get on the Late Show with Conan O'Brien, I think, and do sketches or improv, and then they ended.
Oh,
Yeah, I read that and then they ended up getting their own show on Comedy Central.
it lasted 2 seasons.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll have to look that up and see because I don't know if that might have been the first, maybe not the first, I don't know, but one of the
Interesting, that I
first.
didn't know.
Yeah, like, and they did I think they did, I'm gonna have to go and look up those videos, but I think they did long form improv on TV, which is
Well,
amazing.
if you look at if you've watched their television show, which I highly recommend you go do, every episode is a herald. And if you're not familiar with the
Yeah,
concept of the herald, a herald is a structure that starts with one scene about two people doing something. The second scene is two completely different people doing a completely different thing in a completely different location. It has nothing to do with the first scene. And then the third scene is the same thing, a completely new scene, has nothing to do with scenes 1 or 2, right? And then you repeat it, but like same two characters in a different place at a different time, kind of going through the same game or format, right? So you have scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and then you repeat it, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, but you change it ever so slightly. So if in scene 1, Jessica, if you and I are scene partners and we're like, hey, let's go buy toys together, we're husband and wife, we're going to go buy toys together, hooray, that's scene 1. And then the next time we come back to see these two characters, maybe instead of buying toys, we're buying a house to house our toys in, right? Yay, now we're we love our toys so much, now we're gonna and we explore the relationship between each other, right? And then in the third time that we do this, or the third beat as it's referred to as, in the third beat, same thing. But what's like, if we've already, what's the heightening of that? We've already purchased toys. We've made a house for our toys. What next? Oh, let's make a planet. We're going to have our own planet. And this is where all of our toys get to live, right? We become gods, and our toys now become the creatures living in our godlike world, right?
And it doesn't always have to be that you're in a different place. It could be like, okay, now you're in a different situation. Like each time, like
Exactly.
you can change location, you can change,
There's so
like
many
feeling,
variables.
emotion. You can say,
Yeah.
like there's a lot of different things that you can change, but it has to be like a clear change.
But you want the essence or the spirit of what made it fun or interesting the first time around to keep coming back. You want to which referred to as the game of the scene. And the way Armando, when I was his student, the way he explained it to me, what the game of the scene means is patterns. just a
Mm.
pattern. Like, what's
Yeah.
the pattern? Repeat the pattern. Figure out what the pattern is in the first beat. And then when it comes around for the second beat, repeat the pattern in a different method.
So
Like, try to make it a little bigger, but yeah.